Well, I think there are several dimensions to this that need to be explored. One is, of course, this was a meticulously planned information campaign, disinformation campaign, a lot of accusations against Israel, most of which had no substance. It was preceded by careful preparation of the press environment, the information environment, as well as by murders on the high seas of people who were suspected of being involved in moving drugs, not to the United States actually, but to Trinidad for onward shipment to Europe and West Africa. But quite an elaborate story was developed in the media. The Trump administration announced a revised version of the Monroe Doctrine, presaging a rampage through South America and the Caribbean, and presumably also Central America and North America in the form of Mexico. All of this was quite out in the open. And I think Nicolas Maduro discounted it too much. He seemed to believe that Trump would not be serious. So the first thing is that the operation itself was very skillfully managed. The second is that it is entirely illegal, indecent, an atrocity, really. And I think it put an end to 3 centuries of effort to develop a rule of law, facsimile internationally, starting with the 18th century and going on. And the last 50 years of the 20th century, or much of the 20th century, was spent by the United States trying to promote a vision of the rule of law internationally. That decayed by the time of the Biden administration into something called the rules-bound order, which was basically we make the rules and we enforce them on whoever we wish and exempt whoever we wish, including ourselves, from the rules. But I think what we're seeing is an international reaction that is building to this really outrageous repudiation of the whole idea of rules internationally. I've seen very strong statements by smaller countries, Singapore in your region, since you're in East Asia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. And the fact is that the rule of law has 2 purposes. One is, of course, to provide predictability to the environment so that the people can carry on business in a normal manner, pretty sure of what is and what is not going to happen. But more importantly, it protects the weak against the strong. And the strongest country in the world now, the United States, has just repudiated all consideration of the rights of everyone else. And this is an effective, a sort of tyranny over the globe. I think, frankly, we've seen with the case of Gaza that words of outrage accomplish nothing. If this is not, if the United States is basically not subjected to sanctions by the global majority, pays a price, particularly for its business elite. I think what we're looking at is a horror. I see that Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, is once again under threat from Trump about Greenland. Where does this stop? Trump came into office claiming Greenland. He's also laid a claim to Iceland, remarkably. And I don't see how the European relationship with the United States survives this kind of thing. What happens to NATO? What happens to the EU? Who stands up to this bully? I think it's really this is Zeitenwende, if there ever was one. I haven't even mentioned Panama. But setting a precedent, I just saw a wonderful cartoon somebody sent me which said there was a television broadcaster saying that in news of the Western Hemisphere, a peace-loving democracy has invaded and captured the leader of the dictator of a neighboring warmongering country. And it shows the Canadian Royal Mounted Police hauling Donald Trump off. He's just set a precedent which can be applied to him. That is to say, if a leader is regarded as intolerable in his behavior, now others can take action. And somebody pointed out, what is the justification that Trump used here was which was fictitious for the most part, about drug production in Venezuela. The Mexican government could easily answer, since it's failed totally to get any diplomatic response to its repeated requests to stop the flow of weapons from the United States into Mexico, which are used by the drug cartels there to terrorize Mexican society. Mexicans, following this precedent, could simply bomb the places where the guns are made or stored, and they would have the precedent that Donald Trump has set as a justification. So I think this has huge implications, not just for Venezuela, and there are a number of other aspects of this that are quite absurd. It's very clear that Donald Trump expects Delcy Rodriguez, who is the constitutional successor as acting president to Nicolas Maduro in his absence, now that he's incarcerated in New York, that they expect that because she had a major role in partial repair of the Venezuelan petroleum sector from extremely bad management under Maduro, and she revived Venezuelan oil production to a considerable extent. That just means she can be bought to help American oil companies. She can be enticed to cooperate with the United States. And so she's being subjected, on the one hand, to blandishments. If you cooperate and run Venezuela to our satisfaction, we will leave you alone and our companies will invest and everything will be wonderful for a while anyway. Of course, if you do that kind of deal with a mafioso, it doesn't last. So that's, on the other hand, she's being told, well, if you don't cooperate, your fate will be worse than Maduro's. So this is, again, the mafioso approach to managing relationships. A final note, I just would say that there's a lot of absolute nonsense in the media. There's a report that 20 plutocrats from Wall Street are headed for Venezuela to investigate oil investment opportunities. I wouldn't want to be one of those guys, given the probability that there will be armed opposition in Venezuela to this kind of thing. But quite aside from the danger that any American oil company investing in Venezuela is likely to face from guerrilla action, I think it has to be said that, I was ambassador to Saudi Arabia. At one point, I read that people had advised Henry Kissinger in an earlier era to send the military in to take over the oil fields on the operations of Saudi Aramco. And I just had a good laugh. If you know anything at all about modern petroleum industries, extractive industries, they're enormously complex. They require great expertise. They require years to revive production. There is no immediate payoff from this under any circumstances, even if the security situation permits companies other than Chevron, which has been there all along and cooperative with the regime in Venezuela, to enter the Venezuelan market. So I think this is Looney Tunes. This is complete lunacy, and it needs to be stopped. And is the world going to do something, or are we just going to do the usual European thing of, wringing your hands while sitting on them, which is an uncomfortable position, but it's about all Europeans do these days. I think the case of Syria is a pretty egregious one. It is clearly motivated largely by control of the limited oil production in Syria. But I have to correct you with respect to Iraq. The primary production is all Chinese companies. So we fought the war, and somebody else reaped the benefits economically. And of course, Iraq is still very unsettled as a society and a nation, and divided, and trying to get rid of the American troop presence and continuously failing. So that is not a success. And I'm afraid that this invasion of Venezuela is fairly typical of failed American strategic reasoning. So this is one time we invade, we remove the leader, everything else is supposed to be fine. We take out Saddam, everything is solved in Iraq. We decapitate the government in Tehran with the Israelis, and everything is wonderful. And no, it isn't. And if you take out, as we did, the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is everything wonderful in Syria? I don't think so. So this is a fallacy, and it's a perpetual one. And it is very interesting to me that Venezuela has followed its constitutional process and taken Delcy Rodriguez as the acting president. She's apparently a very competent woman, educated in France. As I said, has a stellar record of management of the mess in the Venezuelan petroleum industry. So she, Trump says, or rather Marco Rubio says, and Trump echoes, well, we can work with her. She'll run the country to our satisfaction because we have her, we got her between threats and inducements. I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case. And Venezuela is a country of 30 million people. Of course, many abroad have fled the misery that our 25 years of sanctions have imposed. This isn't the first time we've kidnapped a Venezuelan president. We did that to Hugo Chavez Frias in 2002 and installed a puppet government in Caracas, which the Venezuelan military then overthrew. And Chavez came back. He died of disease in 2013, I think. Maduro was a bad, not a very competent and probably fairly brutal dictator in his country. There's nobody much who has a kind word to say for him. But a man who is totally illegitimate does not arm 4.5 million people with rifles in a people's militia. So I think the problem of legitimacy that we claim, well, he wasn't legitimate and so forth. Well, first of all, who are we to say that? But anyway, even if he wasn't legitimate in terms of having stolen an election, which we claim may be true, maybe not, that even if he wasn't legitimate in that sense, he was in charge of Venezuela, and people had accepted him in Venezuela for the most part. Those who didn't accept him, left for Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, United States, other places. So I think this is far more complicated. The United States spent the first 100 years of our independence proclaiming that we would never behave like the British and invade everybody. And then we did. And you're quite right. We started by overthrowing the Hawaiian monarchy. We then went on to a war with Spain, which gave us the Philippines and Puerto Rico and Guam. That was the start of that was actually under McKinley and Roosevelt. However, Woodrow Wilson, the great avatar of democracy, was by far the worst, invading Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and of course, picking up on the Roosevelt intervention that created the state of Panama, which had been part of Colombia. We separated that to our advantage. We occupied over the course of the 20th century places like Haiti for about 30 years. It didn't do the Haitians any good, as you can see from their condition today. We had the same thing in Nicaragua that produced a Somoza dictatorship. We did this in the Dominican Republic. We both installed and then removed Trujillo, and so forth and so on. So we had it's a sorry record. But it should teach us something. These interventions did not solve any problems. They did not create democracies, better societies, richer societies. They were very good in the case of, for example, Guatemala, in the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz. They were very good in terms of protecting the assets of the United Fruit Company. But they didn't do anything for Guatemalans. And, on top of everything else, we have an unholy relationship with various right-wing elements in particularly Central America. Trump just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who had been convicted of an incredible trade in narcotics with the United States. At the same time that he's accusing Maduro of doing something, he's pardoning someone who actually did what he's accusing Maduro of doing, mostly falsely. Final note here. Of course, the U.S. is asserting jurisdiction over Maduro. The Vienna Convention gives absolute immunity to a head of state or government, so this is completely illegal under international law. But this is taking place in the Southern District of New York, which is the most corrupt judicial system in the entire United States. And it will be very interesting to see the trial, because if you read the indictment, it's basically a political speech with a lot of ideological baloney. Yeah. I don't think there's much legal in there, and I don't know whether, as corrupt as that jurisdiction is, they can get a conviction. Of course, the precedent here that everybody cites is George H.W. Bush going to Panama and removing Noriega as the president, and then in convicting him of narcotics offenses and putting him in jail and so forth. That was widely condemned at the time as utterly illegal. It was. It's not a helpful precedent. But we have just set a precedent which is rightly regarded by smaller countries all over the world as very dangerous for them. Yeah. We don't seem to think it's dangerous for us, but I suspect it is. And and what will happen in the Ukraine context? Will Russia now feel they can abduct Zelensky from Kyiv? It has the capability to do that. So, what have we started? We don't know. In Afghanistan, we suspended the Geneva Conventions, and we invented a new category called enemy combatant, which didn't require the rights of prisoners of war that are conferred by the Geneva Convention. So the Red Cross, had no access to people in Guantanamo and the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan and so forth and so on. Anyway, there's been a steady progression in the suspension of respect for the rule of law, international treaties, conventions, the UN Charter, and it has been spearheaded by Israel, which has violated every aspect of international law with complete impunity because my government, my country, has protected it and provided it with impunity. And we've now come to the point where we are emulating the complete lawlessness that the Israelis have shown.
Yeah.
I go back to the point. Gaza shows that rhetorical outrage is not enough.
Yeah.
You actually have to do something. And Israel has suffered no penalty for its genocide in Gaza. It is suffering no penalty for its illegal settlement of the West Bank and the eviction of Palestinians from their homes. It suffers no penalty for the murder, even of Americans. Journalists, American journalists, Americans on the USS, on the Liberty during the 1967 war, complete impunity. So this is the result.
Yeah.
If you have no penalty imposed, you go on doing whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what, as you said, that's what the United States is now engaged in. So what are we going to do about this? I think there a couple of things come to mind. First, the international legal crisis that this has created is paralleled by a domestic constitutional crisis. We might as well get rid of the U.S. Congress and the legislative branch. They do nothing. They don't even pass budgets. They shut down the government. They don't hold the president accountable for anything he does. They don't exercise their constitutional authorities. They have the responsibility to declare war, authorize the use of violence against other nations. They don't do it. They are a cult following the president. Let's just get rid of them. We might as well, since we have a dictatorship, we might as well just recognize that. Same thing internationally. Why do we have the United Nations Security Council? What the hell does it do? It serves as a forum for the United States to veto effective international action on issues on which there's a broad international consensus, whether those issues are climate change and combating it, or they are war and peace, or they are standards of human rights, or whether they are the issues of genocide and enforcement of judicial decisions by the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. No, nothing is enforced because the United States vetoes it. In an earlier era, the Soviet Union did the same thing. So why do we have this institution? It's clearly ineffectual. What can be done to restore respect for international consensus-based norms? That is the question now before us. And I've always thought, we're far too hung up on the post-World War II institutions. Of course, they give great advantages to the United States and the Russian Federation, Britain, and France, China, the nominal victors of World War II, and they don't allow the same privilege to major countries like Japan or Korea, and India, and so the system isn't working.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to let it continue not to work as the entire edifice of human decency that the West rightly claims credit for creating over the last 3 centuries is crumbling? What do we do?